welcome to the Strategic Success Podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Fricke. Thanks for tuning in. Hey guys, make sure you stay tuned and listen. I just had a great conversation with Dominique Gunderson. Look guys, she is flipping 10 to 15 houses at a time virtually, okay? So she lives in another state and she's in a different state flipping virtually, right? So we talk a lot about that, some of the lessons she's learned with that, how she's doing that, why did she pick the market that she did. But know that we also talk a lot about things. We talk about private money. That's how she uses for her deals. We also talked about the time freedom she has. So not only does she live in a different state, but she's actually living the van life. It's not exactly a van, but she's traveling all around. And so if you want to learn more about those things, you want to hear about that time freedom, make sure you tune in, listen to what she has to say. It's going to be a great conversation. Thanks for tuning in, as always. Hey, welcome to the show. So, Dominique, I'm excited for us to have our conversation today. So, folks, Dominique Gunderson is with us today, and I know I'm excited to have conversations with you, but and you and I have known each other for a few years now. Time flies by, right? But So let me introduce you to the folks who are listening. So you got investing pretty shortly after getting out of high school. Mm-hmm. Started working in the real estate industry and then got into investing. You've done a number of different strategies. You started, you dipped your toe in a lot of different places, but now you mostly focus on virtual flipping, which I'm not going to lie. When you go to a meetup and you meet people, very rarely do you meet someone who's like, oh yeah, that's what I do. Usually it's like, I flip in my backyard, or I virtually wholesale, right? Mm-hmm. So like less risk, or I have rentals or something. But then, you've also not just done it as like a onesie twosie, you're doing it at volume. So you've done 100 plus deals. On average, you do 10 to 15 flips at a time. They're in any, given part of the phase of flipping, the different phases. So, look, I've always been impressed with you and I enjoy your friendship. And so I'm looking forward for us having this conversation today. So, let's get started. So yeah. Talk to us about, tell us where you're based out of right now.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me.
Sure.
Same, just always love catching up and chatting. So this will be fun. Yeah, like you said, I do virtually flip. I've lived in a number of different markets and still invested outside of that market. So New Orleans, obviously here where we are, is where I've always invested, fixing and flipping, but I've lived in Los Angeles, Colorado, and then now I actually live totally remote, traveling around the country. So I'm always somewhere else, right. But yeah, it's super cool. That's like literally my favorite part about virtual flipping, because sure. It's just so freeing to like do this strategy that most people feel like is such a full-time job. You have to be on the ground. You have to be at your projects every day.
Right.
To be able to do that and just travel the country, be wherever I want is just, it's awesome.
So I love it. So, okay. So when you were in Los Angeles, cause that's where you got started, right? And then you went to Colorado, two high cost of living areas.
Yes.
So did you meet people who were flipping in those areas locally?
Yeah. Ton of people. When I started in real estate, the first couple years of my career, I was doing a lot of wholesaling. And I lived in Los Angeles and I wholesaled in Los Angeles. So I got connected to a huge network of people that were my buyers, that were sure. flipping there. And obviously it's a super competitive market. You can make a lot of money because it is such a high dollar market.
Right. What was the highest price deal you ever sold?
I wholesaled a property that was like 1.2 million, I want to say. Mm-hmm. Probably 2 million once they finished flipping it.
Good
so
Lord.
yeah.
Yeah, we definitely don't really touch that down here.
Right.
Okay, so obviously higher cost of areas. What drew you to consider virtual, right?
Yeah.
Because obviously there's people who are succeeding in your backyard. Mm-hmm. Obviously buyers that you knew, people yep. Who that you could either go to, learn from, whatever. But what drew you out of those markets?
Yeah, so I think the main thing was I was super well connected. Like those were my buyers. Those were the deals that I was learning on. I had done 40 or 50 wholesale deals in that market before I started flipping. So
Mhm.
it made sense. Like, why don't you just flip where you already are and you already have the connections? But for me at the time, like I was just kind of getting started in my career. I was 21 when I bought my first flip. So in that like price point and just being that age, it was just it felt really hard and like
Mhm.
just too much of a stretch based
Sure,
on
like daunting. Yeah.
yeah, based on just man, if I mess one of these up, like I could bankrupt myself, you know? And
Sure.
I'm 21. I don't have millions of dollars to like go out. I'd have to like raise capital from people that are going to trust me. And I've never done a flip here. I've just wholesaled. So
Right.
it just felt very daunting. Whereas starting to look out of state in a market that I could afford with what I had saved from all my wholesale fees to buy and flip on my own, get a couple under my belt, build a
Right.
track record, and then start scaling, that just felt much more attainable.
What did wholesaling so from what I remember right, you worked, you know, at a company where it was like almost like a call center, a whole bunch of not a call center, but like, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Where there's a whole bunch of folks who were in there and you guys were all wholesaling, right?
Hmm.
What did you learn from being in that environment, doing those deals that you utilize today?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It was a similar feel to like working at a real estate office, like an
Sure,
agency where
sure.
you got a bunch of realtors who are all in the office and they sit at their desk next to you, but like when they close a deal, you don't benefit from it,
Yeah,
but you benefit in the sense that like you hear their phone calls, you get to see what they're doing, you
yeah,
can sit in on their client meetings, like whatever. So that was a huge benefit for me working at a company like that versus just wholesaling totally on my own.
right.
Like when other people were doing stuff around me, I didn't get to partake in it, but I got to see exactly what they were doing, what was working, and then go out and do it for me.
Yeah,
So some of those, just like listening to those sales calls, the like one-liner pitches that you can use to like
yeah.
close deals and stuff, that was probably my biggest takeaway that helped me just start doing deals and getting a lot of wholesale volume quickly. And again, still stuff I use today. Like I still talk to sellers, I still deal with buyers and agents and all these, parties. So
Well, in that kind of bullpen type setup, yeah, there's something about being around it. And
totally.
I think that goes to you grow into the conversations you're around,
Hmm.
right? You become like the people, you surround yourself with. And versus if you're in isolation,
Yeah,
just at your house making those phone calls, like obviously people still find success with that all the time, but
sure.
there's just something about that. So I think that's great. So okay, so you're virtually flipping and you're focusing on affordable homes.
Hmm.
When you got started here, what did that look like?
Yeah, so when I first started flipping in New Orleans, it was almost like a must do for me because I was just starting. I had so much cash to invest of my own before I started like raising money and stuff. So I almost entered that segment of the market out of like I had to.
Yeah, like out of necessity, so much.
Yeah,
Right. And a lot of time when people get started, I mean, hey, I mean, when I got started, I was like, hey, I have $40,000.
right. What can I
Well,
do with
what
it?
can I buy with it?
Yeah.
Well, I bought a condo for $40,100 and
Yep,
I
yep.
stressed with the 100.
Right, right. Exactly.
But yeah, okay, so it was like, hey, this is what I have. So
Hmm.
then therefore this is my price point I'm gonna get started in.
Correct. Yeah. So that's how I very first deal that I bought in New Orleans was like, okay, what can I afford? And then also afford the rehab on top of that, and I'm good. So bought a house for 50,000 and
Mhm.
put like 45 into it. I was trying to stay under 100,000 all in. And that was just, it started to be like a sweet spot for me. I did one, I did two and three, and like it was working. And it seemed to be a good segment of the market here where a lot of people could afford that price point. When we were reselling for 150 to 200,000, it's hard to really find a renovated house any cheaper than that.
Yeah.
So everybody who was just getting started and looking to buy something that's where they're looking to buy. You know, as you start going 300, 400, 500, your buyer pool just gets smaller. So I
Yeah.
literally just started doing what was working. And then like, as I was getting more experience as an investor and realizing like the market data and like where there are the most amount of buyers and like some of those more specific details that you learn to focus on later, like I started to focus on it more, but literally it just like
Sure.
kind of happened,
So
you
you
know?
started by necessity, and then
Yeah,
you realized there was a concept based on the data and
totally.
all that, right?
Yep, yep,
All right, so that sounds good. And then, like, a lot of people talk about that. Go in that spot that everyone can afford. So
yep.
whether it's a rental, whether it's a a flip,
Mhm.
because some people they're like, hey, I want to get into flipping. Like most of them, like again, they shouldn't be going out there buying the $1 million house in a market
Sure.
where the average, I think in New Orleans, the average price is what, 275 or something like that. It's like
Mhm.
something like that.
Right.
And so going super outside that average price
Yep.
point, again, it's less buyers, less things like that. So with that being said, um, now, okay, so you're flipping affordable homes, okay?
Mhm.
What are some lessons that you learned in doing that?
Hmm. So many things. I think the first thing is kind of what you just touched on is like when you're just starting out to not go super far outside of the average for the market, or to even stay like significantly under it. And one of the reasons I also like did that and was in the back of my head, when I was in Los Angeles, I wholesaled, and on the side, I was also doing acquisitions for a really large company out there that bought like 200 flips a year in the Los Angeles area. And that was one thing they drilled into us on the acquisition side when I was like making offers and buying deals for them, was like their sweet spot. I mean, the average price point in Los Angeles was probably like 500, 600, 700,000 at the time. They were like, we want anything from like 3 to 400 on the resale side. So they were buying at like 200,000 in Los Angeles. Not great parts of Los
So they're buying in
Angeles,
the
but
hood at that point.
exactly.
Okay.
And that was the sweet
So
spot.
obviously, in my head, I'm like, of course, Los Angeles has a hood, but like in
Yep,
my head,
yep.
like when you think Los Angeles, you think $1 million homes.
Right.
But obviously, every market has the various price points.
Exactly. So I had that drilled into me, and it was like one of the best things I probably took away from some of the work I did in Los Angeles. Just, I mean, trusting the data of someone who's buying hundreds of houses per year, and they're obviously buying what works, you know. So kind of getting that data and being like, okay, clearly like there's something to this whole stay in that segment of the market. And I kind of started to see it once I was doing it here on my own. So that was one thing, is just like it was really obvious as I started getting into it that having that big buyer pool, that like almost price competitiveness and bidding
Yeah.
more stuff on your resale side is hugely important, you know, for
Yeah.
not having high days on market and running up your interest costs and
Sure.
all of this stuff.
Where you're looking for one unique buyer
Right.
who's like,
Exactly.
going to fall in love with this home because in order to be able to afford it, to be able to want to buy it. No, you
Right.
want as many people wanting it as possible.
Exactly.
So no, I love that. Now talk to me as the last few years, as the market has shifted. Talk to me about what's happened to your model. What have you done? Obviously here we talk about, the next conversations around the next right step. So the market started, the market went crazy. How was 2021 for you?
Yep. Yep.
2021 was when prices were going out the roof,
Yeah.
multiple offers on everything. How was that for you?
Yeah. So 2021 was insane. Every house was having the exact opposite problem of what we're having now, where 2021 we were getting bid up so high that the houses weren't appraising.
Yeah.
And
then those folks didn't have the money to bridge the gap, right?
exactly.
In that price point. Okay.
And now we have so many low sales that appraisers are using on their comps. It's like the houses aren't appraising for the opposite reason,
So now in 2024, and because look, so 2020 COVID, 2021 the market shot up. 2022 it was still active.
Yep.
But then it was like going in, but then that's when that rate change was happening like crazy. And then going in 2023, I mean, I feel in the New Orleans market, pretty much from June of 2023 until February of 2024, we have like,
It's been dead.
it's been dead.
Yep.
It has literally been dead.
Yep.
And so talk to me about some of the pivots that you've made during that time.
Sure. So yeah, I started feeling it. It's nice too when you have like a bunch of deal flow, you can kind of get a really good sense of like,
This
hey,
is not just a
things,
one-off.
yeah,
Yeah.
things are slowing down like across the board. So
Yep.
around April of 2023, I stopped buying in the like super affordable price point. So it was good because it was before we really, really slowed down. But I still had some that were lingering from, January, February, March that I was trying to resell come end of summer. And exactly, it was dead. Like you said, like they just wouldn't sell. So luckily, because I made that shift in like the spring, it wasn't like I had bought houses that weren't selling for the entire year and just had this huge stack of inventory. But I had some that, come late 2023, I just couldn't sell them. Like we were getting offers, but they wouldn't make it to the closing table. And so I ended up just keeping a bunch of those properties that I had flipped as rentals, which was also great about that affordable price point because it's pretty easy to get a decently cheap mortgage on those properties to where the rent is still going to be higher and you can still cash flow them as like a backup plan. So I ended up doing that with some of them. And then, around April, I stopped buying in that affordable price point because it was just obviously slowing down, becoming less affordable. And those buyers were almost getting pushed out of the market to the point where they were like, you know what, we're going to just wait. So they weren't even buying at all. And so I switched to a slightly higher price point, more around the average that you mentioned, close to the 300 mark, and just started buying flips that were going to sell not in the high end price point, but slightly higher to where those buyers were being a bit less affected by everything that was going on in the market.
So, okay, so you're going from the affordable price points now toward, are you like at the median price point, like the 275 range?
Pretty much.
Or above it?
Most of them that I have now are, I'd say 300 is like kind of the lower end, and then like up to about 500. So 3 to 500.
So what does that shift look like for you? How has that impact your buying criteria? Let's start with that.
Sure. I'd say one of the biggest shifts, not so much in the buying criteria, but just shifts in the business is changing my team. The team looks different, for a high-end rehab. The realtor is different, the contractor, the project management aspect, the design, like everything is just a little different. You're paying attention more to like tiny little specific details and what
finishes, amenities.
Yeah, what might a buyer pick apart about the house versus like, is this a fully functional, great, entry-level home that people are just happy that it's beautiful and functional.
Sure.
So it does affect the buying criteria a bit, just in the sense that I'm paying way more attention to like, how's the layout of this house, and what little things are people going to think the yard's too small and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But biggest change by far has been building a new team for it.
That must be tough, given that you had a team that you worked with for so long on so many deals. So now let's talk about so some of your team has changed, things like that. Do you see yourself ever going back to the affordable, like when the market stabilizes?
Yeah, so it's still a segment of the market I know so well. Like
Sure,
the
with
certain
volume, yeah.
neighborhoods that I've flipped in, I've bought on like almost every street. So I just know it like the back of my hand. But at this exact moment, I don't see myself flipping in that price point. I still buy in that price point, but now I just keep them as rentals. Like it's just a default. I haven't flipped in that price point in a while.
So you might be still using your team, but it would be for renovating it for a rental versus
Correct.
for resale. And
Yep. So yeah, still have had quite a few projects in the last year that I've bought in that price point, but I've just bought them to renovate to rent.
Okay. And then, so how are you liking the higher price point?
Yeah, I do. I like it a lot. again, there's like a fine balance to where you start getting into like almost close to 500 plus. And like, I'm not a big fan of that. I've done a few of those and like, it just starts to get to that segment of the market where the buyers are super picky. And that's like a pretty expensive, house for this neighborhood. So you're dealing with like a big house, a lot of potential problems with the buyers just being picky and who they are.
Right. Well, I know like right now here in the New Orleans market, we're seeing at that price point, like for example, in that price point in Metairie, that stuff's just sitting
Totally.
100+ days on the market.
Yep.
Because there's just less. I mean, obviously we have our insurance crisis going on, a few things
Right.
like that. We just have less people who are buying at that price point.
Totally.
And so that's impacted. Obviously, the lower end, the lowest end, what did you see with the lowest end that caused you to, and I didn't ask this earlier, what caused you to get out of it? You were seeing things, but what were you seeing?
Yeah, so it was mainly on the buyer side, just starting to see like fear, I'd say, is like we were just putting houses under contract and never making it to the closing table. And there was always a reason. It tended to be different, but along the same lines of fear, like people who
Afraid about what was going to happen in the market, or
not sure if their paychecks were going to cover, if an insurance bump happened, or if they couldn't lock in this specific interest rate. Like it was just so on the edge of like paycheck to paycheck, or find one thing on an inspection report that typically would not have even been requested, but they're just so afraid that like, if I have $1,000 expense in the next year, I can't cover it, So it was that type of mindset with a lot of buyers that we were just not closing. We weren't closing deals 4 or 5 times into escrow and not getting to the closing table.
Wow. And that can be 4 to 5 times going under contract and then every time not closing on one deal.
Yep.
There's a part of that you're just like, did I buy a bad property? Like what? Like, you know what I mean? Like you start, but a lot of it can be still just reflective of the market. It's not necessarily reflective of the deal or of the, the property.
Yep.
And it can be hard. And so obviously you pivoted those into rentals, but then talk to me about that pivot into rentals.
Yeah.
So what does that look like for you? Obviously it's happening out of necessity, kind of similar to how you chose, virtual flipping.
Sure.
But now how has that journey been for you getting into these rentals?
It's actually been awesome. I really love it. And
by the way, today's the 5th.
Yeah, right.
And like, okay, rent was due recently.
Yep. No, but it's been really good. The New Orleans market, I think, is, despite the insurance and all the things here, like it's a really great rental market. It's one of not a lot of markets across the country where you can significantly cash flow with zero money left in the deal. If you buy it right, you fix it up and you add that equity. I have a lot of properties that still cash flow like at least $300 a door after I took all my money out of the deal. And that's like not easy to find in most markets in the US. So I think it's still a great market. Used to be twice as good before the insurance went up, but there's still deals, and so, and especially in that lower end price point, like it's a great backup plan. If it doesn't sell, if something happens, you go over budget and the margins don't work for whatever reason, like pretty good chance it can still work as a rental.
And I know that's been huge. Are you self-managing, or did you add to your team in that regard where there's management, or what does that look like?
No, I'm self-managing. I have someone that handles like the lease ups for me when we have something that needs to be like listed and doing showings and stuff. But other than that, it's just all through a rental software.
Okay, that's awesome. So now, one of the things I want to talk about is flipping virtually, because obviously you're still doing that. When people talk virtual, what do you think a lot of people get wrong with that? Because people virtually wholesale, they have rentals in different markets. They obviously, you're talking about flipping virtually. What are some of the things that you think people either don't think about or they get wrong, stuff like that?
I think one of the biggest ones, and I know because I've talked to people about this, that there's a debate with what I'm going to say. I'm not saying it can't be done. I know people do it, but I think you have to personally know your market. Even if you don't live there, you're going to do it virtual. You have to personally know it. And I think there's two facets to that. One is you need to go there and like get it in your head kind of personal knowledge, like driving the streets and meeting the people and like
Right.
networking and stuff like that.
Sure.
But I think the second facet is like you need to have a personal connection or relationship with that market.
Yeah.
And again, plenty to disagree with me, that's fine. But like looking back on me choosing New Orleans, like 100% the reason it's worked for me is because this was not a random market for me.
Hey guys, Courtney Fricke here. We've got Aussie Steve. And look, if you have a deal that needs to get moved, Southeast Louisiana, even in South Mississippi, we're your folks. We are the largest dispo company, really in the greater New Orleans area, even Southeast Louisiana. We have great contacts in South Mississippi as well. Steve, why do we move more deals than others?
Just we're very deep in this market. So Greater New Orleans can be really confusing for national wholesalers. The comps are hard. We change block for block. We got flood zones. You know, we get a lot of hurricanes and the likes. And just a lot of the national platforms don't have the buyers on their list. So we are deep with buyers, but we're deep with relationships, which is really important in this market. So we love JVing with out-of-state investors.
Like I said, we do a ton of business with other investors. So go to homebuyerlouisiana.com/Courtney. Fill out the information, we'll get in touch with you and we'll move this deal along.
Yeah. Like my family lives here and it's an easy place for me to visit. It's somewhere I would come anyway, like just to be with family. And so like having that knowledge of just like, it doesn't matter, they're not contractors, they're not in real estate, like they don't know what I'm doing here, but they know the area, they know the streets, they know the neighborhoods, like they have connections with, hey, here's a plumber I used on my house, you know, and just little details to where I could start somewhere instead of just like, I've never been here, I don't know anyone here.
If someone's like, so here's one of the things where I usually, the word annoyed seems to be too strong, but like, I disagree with folks when they're just like, oh, well, I heard about a deal in, you know, small town Ohio. I think I'm going to buy it because it sounds good on paper. It's cheap, whatever, you know, friend of the family knows somebody. And it's like you're chasing things by default versus by design. So what I'm hearing you say is that you came here by design for various reasons. And I find that one thing I think people do wrong is that they're just, it's almost like, oh, well, I saw in some Facebook group, someone had this deal and it sounds good. That's, that is so far from, you know, again, doing it by design, because a huge part of that is great. You can find a good deal. But I know people who, so there's a few people I've met over the years who like, they just buy stuff all over the country, just wherever they can find a deal. But you want to know what? They struggle. All those margins drip out because they can't get it rented. They can't get it renovated. They get money stolen from them because they don't know a contractor. And, you know, they're not there on site or whatever. And so they have all these headaches because they don't have that infrastructure built in place, you know, knowing the market. And so that's huge. And so kudos to you because you are a mile deep in this market. You understand this market. It is not, you know, plenty of people could be confused and say that you live here, you know, like just with how much you know it and how much you're involved and how much, you know, with the local RIAs, online, things like that. So any other thoughts on things that people with virtual that you want to share or?
That's definitely the big one for me, I think. And I've had so many conversations with people too, like that know what I do and know that I am virtual and kind of ask like, how can I replicate that essentially? And just like, even after having those conversations, it's always obvious to me, like, okay, you have never been here or, you know, like, I don't know how you're going to like properly justify that deal or even know the comps or know the neighborhoods and the block to block streets without
New Orleans
going
is
there.
Wild.
Exactly. And so I'm sure there's plenty of markets where, you know, it's built almost like Las Vegas, where it's like all just subdivisions. And by driving each one, you're not really getting a feel for anything different. They all look the same, you know, maybe something like that you could, as long as you have some familiarity or like an ability to build a team, could pull the trigger without a ton of on-site knowledge. But yeah, a place like New Orleans, like every neighborhood is so different. Like you
We have a lot of
really have
nuances
to
here.
know. Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we see that with virtual wholesalers, right?
Right.
They come here and they're like they'll tell me like, oh, you can Airbnb that property. I'm like, have you not seen the news lately? Like
Yeah.
Airbnb is all but dead in New Orleans right now. Like, or they're like, I'm like, hey, that is actually a very like bad flood zone. There's very few people who are going to want to buy that property.
Yep.
Oh, we'll put,
Right.
like at the end of the day, there's things, and talking with comps, I think that's the biggest thing where, especially, I mean, I lived on the North Shore in the suburbs, and I did the majority of my business on that for the beginning of the years of my career. And then when I moved into New Orleans, I would question my, running comps and stuff. I'd question my valuation. And I actually partnered with, Aussie Steve a good bit because I was like, I was not confident I was getting my numbers right.
Yep.
Because a huge part to that is knowing in New Orleans, you might have $1 million home and then not even a blank later, you have 150.
Right.
Things like that. So I think that's huge.
Yep.
Is understanding your market, understanding the nuances. Places like Houston that doesn't have zoning, or I started buying in Baton Rouge, and I mean, like, there's just all these different like nuances, different states, like in Mississippi. So I've worked pre-foreclosures for 10 years. The foreclosure process is completely different. It is faster to foreclose than to evict in Mississippi. Not in Louisiana.
Right.
Like, so it's just, again, I think it's a lot of people who are like throwing darts at a wall.
Right.
And I don't care if that's virtual or not virtual. If you're throwing darts as your business plan, as your general plan, that is nothing. There's nothing strategic about it. And I love having strategy around what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Success doesn't come by happenstance, right? It doesn't come because you stumble into it.
Yeah.
It's like, I want people to plan for it and then achieve it because they're heading in the right direction, right?
Right.
All right. Getting off that soapbox. So tell me this, do you think you could replicate your model in a different market?
Yeah, totally.
So what would that look like?
So
Have you ever considered it?
Yeah. I'm less likely to do it with the flipping just because it takes so much knowledge and so much building of the team, because it's such an active, like, every day something's going on, problems are happening. I'd be more likely to do it on the rental side because it's so much more passive. But I think it was like an interesting experiment, almost jumping from just price points in this market and seeing like that was actually pretty easy to do. And it did feel like almost jumping from a totally different market, because the neighborhoods where I'm buying now with the more expensive properties, I would never have touched before. So it's still, you're still going through those learning curves of like, okay, I got to go drive this new area. I got to go learn these new nuances and streets and permitting rules and all these things. Build a new team. Like, a lot of things have changed and it wasn't that difficult. So I know I could do it in another market, but it would just, again, I'd want to find a market that like I had some sort of personal connection with, or could see myself going to more often, like a place that I really love or have great friends or family. I wouldn't just choose a random place.
Yeah, I think there's a trend here with that. But well, cool. I have really admired how you have, obviously you have found success, with the volume of deals that you're doing and all of those things. But at the same time, you are fighting for and building out time freedom in your life, right? Talk to me about what that looks like and what is your philosophy and thought patterns around that? Because many people, right, they put their head down, they work 80 to 100 hours a week, and a lot of times people can't lift that head up from the grind. And to do things with their family. I mean, I met many people who I wouldn't want to trade places with them because, they work 100 hours a week. They're on their third marriage and they're overweight, right? Like all these things, I'm just like, okay, and they're not happy, but they have all the money in the jet. What I mean? Like, so what does that look like for you? What prompted you to start doing those things?
Yeah. I think it was a lot of like what I saw growing up too. You know, I came from a family that didn't have a lot of money, and almost like tried to like put on that face. Like we lived in the Los Angeles area, very expensive area. Like it's not easy to settle down there, but like it's pretty obvious when you do and you can't afford it, you know? So I watched my parents, like kind of what you're talking about, you know, get divorced and have just constant financial trouble and like just not be like stable and have like a plan for the future and retirement and all of that. So I think seeing that at a young age definitely motivated both me and my brother, because we're both very like, okay, when we grow up, like we need to start our own business, like we need to figure this out, have like a plan for the future, stuff like that.
Because he has a construction company, right?
He does, yeah.
Yeah.
So both my brother and I were like, yeah, we gotta do something different, you know?
Yeah.
And so from like the financial perspective, that was one thing. But like you were saying, it's not just all about the money. Like
Right.
you just have all this money and no time or no family or no, you know, health or whatever, like it's pointless.
Right.
So I think like seeing both of those things, you know, both of the like breakup of the family and the marriage and like, you know, just not having happiness and not having money, like it was kind of clear, I guess, and obvious that like you needed both. You know, it wasn't just a one thing fixes all. So that motivation has been there for a long time in me. But again, the more you like do it and experience it, you kind of learn for yourself, like, okay, like that was cool, that was fun closing that deal, but like I don't have anyone to enjoy it with, or
Right.
I just have to go to work and do it all over again the next day. Like what good is that? You know, and so you start
Exactly.
like doing that and experiencing it for yourself, and it just reinforces, you know, the
Well, I think that's huge. So I think a lot of, you know, you and I are similar in age. I think a lot of folks, we watched our parents slave away at a job and
Sure.
their boss didn't, you know, didn't do anything to really, I mean, watch how many people like there was that one viral thing where a guy was like never missed a day working for 30 years at Burger King. And they gave him like what, the little bag with like the gift cards and the popcorn and the
Right.
and the you know what I mean? Like I'm like, send that man on a vacation. I'm like, you know what I mean?
yeah
But the reality is that like it's reminds me of, and I could pull it, the Cash Flow Quadrant book, where Robert Kiyosaki talks about how like you have to mind your own business. Like when you go work, like so when you're an employee, you mind other people's business, right?
Right.
Like you're, you know, that's why they say like either have a vision of your own or you're gonna help build someone else's, right?
Yep.
A huge part of that is that folks are, you know, there's a whole part of that where we watch people just slave away.
Yeah.
And or the sad thing is they'll get to their 60s and retire and then their health is not there.
Yep.
I mean, I watched someone retire and within a few weeks have a stroke and they had all these grand plans for retirement.
Right.
Now I'm going to retire and travel and do this and that. So it's like we have seen that. I feel like millennials and whatnot, it's like this whole retire early type movement. So let's talk about time freedom. What does that look like in your life? So obviously you guys made the big announcement about what this year looks like. You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so kind of like I mentioned at the beginning, but just traveling for a year. So it's exciting. It's fun to basically take the remote work I was already doing, but just take it anywhere and see the country. And my husband and I have like a travel trailer and pull it behind our truck, and we're just, you know, going everywhere. Big road trip. Do y'all have the dirt bikes?
Do y'all have the dirt bikes?
We have the dirt bikes.
That's awesome.
The surfboards, everything. So yeah,
So where all have y'all visited so far?
So we left in March, so it's been about a month, and we have toured around Utah and Arizona. So we've been to like a lot of the national parks out that way, about to head to the coast. So yeah, it's been awesome, and just so cool. Like I knew that I had a lot of time freedom, but you know, sometimes when you're just like at home and you're at your office, if there's time, you'll do something with it,
Yeah,
you know,
you get busy.
to better your business. But
Sure.
like, you don't really need to, do all
Sure.
those things. There's only like certain necessity tasks each day. So it's been really cool to like see that really come into practice as well of like,
Right.
you know what, like today at noon, we have something planned or we're going on this hike or whatever. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna be done by noon, and then we're
Sure.
gonna go.
And it's also whatever that, there's like a law or something that says like however much time you give yourself to finish a task, like that's how long it's going to
Yeah,
take, right?
yeah.
If you're going to give yourself 2 days,
Yeah.
or if you're going to give yourself 2 hours, well, that's how long it's going to take.
Yeah.
And so I love that. What's been one of your favorite places you've visited so far?
Arches National Park has
Okay.
been super cool.
Where's that at?
That is in Utah, yeah.
Yeah.
Moab, Utah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, so let's talk about, because I've been watching it. Where can people watch y'all's journey?
Yeah. So we started like an Instagram page just to kind of share our travels, which is Gunderson's on the road.
We'll share that in the show notes too.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And then I share a lot of stuff, some stuff on my personal Instagram, but a lot of real estate stuff as well at Dom Flips Nola.
And so I love that. So, well, guys, look, we're going to take a break here. This is part 1. We're about to dive into part 2. If you've enjoyed this conversation, make sure you stay tuned for part 2.